This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. South Korea charges 2 Air Force pilots with criminal negligence for the accidental bombing of a village near the North Korean border. Well, the misfire left at least 29 people injured. Taiwan's leader William Lai calls for tougher measures to counter what he sees as China's growing influence and infiltration efforts against the island, while authorities in Beijing reaffirm their stance on reunification. A former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, held inside this prison in The Hague, takes full responsibility for his administration's deadly war on drugs as he faces trial for crimes against humanity. And in business news, Taiwan's central bank warns of risks to economic growth amid worsening stock market outflows and escalating trade tensions. Also in East Asia tonight, we delve into the spending power of China's middle class, a group of some 400 million people seen as the driving force of the country's economy. But what happens if they cut back on buying? South Korea's military investigators have charged 2 Air Force pilots with criminal negligence following the accidental bombing of a village near the North Korean border during a live fire exercise last week.
업무상 과실치상 외에 일부 전투 시설 또는 군용 시설이 손괴된 부분이 있어서 그런 부분에 대한 혐의도 적용된 것으로 알고 있습니다.
오폭의 원인이 좌표를 잘못 입력하고 그것을 제대로 확인하지 않았으며 마지막 사격 단계에서 육안으로 표적을 확인하지 않고 무장을 호화한 것이었습니다.
The pilots were taken off duty after 8 unguided air-to-surface bombs from their KF-16 fighter jets hit a village near the border with North Korea. Well, the accident injured at least 29 people and caused severe property damage. The Air Force responded by grounding nearly all aircraft. Live fire exercises planned as part of U.S.-South Korea joint military exercises were also suspended following the mishap. The bombing has sparked renewed safety concerns among local residents who have long complained about the risks associated with military training in the area. The Air Force has apologized for the accident and pledged to review procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. Now, North Korean state media KCNA seized on the opportunity to condemn the large-scale joint military drills between Washington and Seoul on the border, calling it a malicious move that could spark armed conflict on the Korean peninsula. China has reiterated its stand on realizing reunification with Taiwan after the island's leader, William Lai, accused Beijing of deepening its influence and infiltration against the self-ruled island and vowed countermeasures on the legal and economic front against Beijing's attempts to absorb Taiwan.
台湾是中国的一部分，没有什么总统。你提到的呢，也不是一个外交问题。我可以告诉你的是，不管民进党当局说什么，都改变不了台湾是中国一部分的事实，改变不了祖国必然统一的大势。
Reunification plans with Taiwan came under the spotlight during China's 2 sessions, which concluded this week. Beijing has repeated that it does not renounce the use of force to achieve its reunification aims. And for more on this, we are joined now by Victoria Jen in Taipei. Now, Vic, Mr. Lai, in his address, I believe he laid out a few accusations against China. What exactly did he say?
Well, the news conference took place after the monthly Security Council meeting in Taipei. And President William Lai unveiled a set of sweeping national security measures. At the top of the list, the reinstatement of court-martial trials for military personnel accused of espionage. He claimed that measures are needed against what he called growing infiltration attempts by Chinese operatives on the island. Now, according to Mr. Lai, last year alone, 64 Taiwanese were charged with espionage, including 15 military officers. That's 3 times higher than 2021, in what he termed as a deeply alarming breach of Taiwan security. He also pledged to tighten the screening process for Chinese visitors entering Taiwan to block what he claimed were efforts to promote reunification or spread pro-Beijing ideology. Now, at recently concluded 2 sessions in Beijing, Chinese leaders reiterated China's position that reunification with Taiwan as a central national goal. President Lai's hardline pro-independence position, what he called growing infiltration threats from China, comes as his minority government is battling the opposition over its budget plan. Now, the legislature, controlled by the opposition on Wednesday, voted again to pass a stripped-down budget to the government's dismay. Mr. Lai's government has pledged to take this to the Constitutional Court. The battle over the budget provides a glimpse of what Mr. Lai's government can expect in the coming years, and that the opposition will do all they can to make it difficult for Lai to govern.
So Victoria, we know that the Taiwanese leader, William Lai, he's got a strong voice against China. But on the domestic front, he is facing several challenges, isn't he?
That's right. While President Lai came out strong on the international stage, his position at home is a lot more complicated. And without a clear majority, pushing through big reforms could be tough, such as the national budget. He's also dealing with a fractured political climate. Now, public opinion is mixed, especially among young voters and moderates who might support Taiwan's democracy, but worry that a hardline stance on China could lead to real-world consequences. Now, some critics say Lai's rhetoric is too provocative, that while he's good at standing firm against Beijing, he hasn't yet laid down a clear domestic game plan to match the same energy at home. Even with his own party, there are questions about his leadership style. His predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, was known for carefully balancing strong defense with diplomatic restraint. Lai, by contrast, has a more outspoken approach, especially on independence, and that is likely to draw more scrutiny going forward. So, yes, President Lai is projecting confidence abroad, but at home, analysts say he will need to focus on coalition building, compromise, and earning public trust if he wants to turn bold words into real policy.
Hey, many thanks for that report. Victoria Jen in Taipei. Well, China has accused New Zealand's intelligence chief of spreading what Beijing calls false information after Wellington's top spy warned of security risks posed by growing Chinese influence in the Pacific. Well, New Zealand's intelligence chief Andrew Hampton last week said that China wanted to create what he called competing regional architectures. He said Beijing's efforts to expand its influence with Pacific Island nations pose foreign interference and espionage risks. China's embassy in New Zealand has slammed the comments as completely baseless. Beijing urged the intelligence chief to stop, quote, mirroring China with Cold War thinking and zero-sum mentality. Beijing has struck a number of strategic deals with Pacific nations in recent years. Just last month, China signed a new comprehensive strategic deal with the Cook Islands following a visit by the Pacific nations' prime minister to Beijing. Well, that agreement had angered Wellington, which complained about the lack of consultation and transparency around the deal. The Cook Islands is a self-governing nation under a free association agreement with New Zealand, where Wellington helps on issues such as foreign affairs, disasters, and defense. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte spent his first night in a jail cell in The Hague after becoming the first Asian former head of state to be indicted by the International Criminal Court. He faces charges of crimes against humanity over his deadly anti-drug crackdown. A former Philippine leader was brought to a detention center in The Hague yesterday. He was flown from Manila overnight with a layover in Dubai for medical attention before reaching Rotterdam. He's the first suspect to be flown to The Hague in 3 years. During the flight, Mr. Duterte recorded a message saying that he would take full responsibility for actions carried out by law enforcement under his leadership.
Whatever happened in the past, ako na yung nag-front sa ating law enforcement pati military. Sinabi ko na, I will protect you and ako ang managot sa lahat.
Mr. Duterte's daughter, Vice President Sarah Duterte, has flown to the Netherlands to assist him. She criticized current President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. for surrendering her father to the ICC, questioning the court's jurisdiction over the Philippines. Well, Mr. Marcos stated that the country was obliged to cooperate with Interpol and took Mr. Duterte into custody on Tuesday after his return from Hong Kong. The Philippine President's office added that Mr. Duterte could face up to 30 years or life in prison if convicted. The ICC investigation into Mr. Duterte's actions had been ongoing for 8 years. The court said he surrendered and a hearing will take place in due course. It further said that there had been reasonable grounds to charge Mr. Duterte as an indirect co-perpetrator in a campaign that killed thousands. Petitions have been filed in Manila to bring the former president back to the Philippines. The Supreme Court has delayed issuing a restraining order on his arrest, while Mr. Duterte's legal team continues to appeal for his return. Public reactions remain mixed. His supporters claim he is unfairly targeted, while others see his arrest as a long-awaited step toward justice. And we spoke with Raul Panglangan. He's a former judge at the ICC in The Hague, and he explained what he expects the next few days to look like for former President Duterte.
The first, in the next, 48 to 90 hours, Duterte will have to be presented before the pretrial chamber. The next stage will be what we call the confirmation of charges. And it is expected that his lawyers at that stage will raise many of the objections that you mentioned earlier, saying that the court has lost jurisdiction over the case, etc. So that is the next stage, Arnold.
Professor, as we speak, I understand that a number of petitions and motions have and will be filed by Duterte's family and supporters at the Philippine Supreme Court to press for his release, or as you mentioned, to ask for the case to be heard in the Philippines. How does the ICC handle rulings that may come its way, from courts like the Supreme Court of the Philippines, and also issues of jurisdiction? Does it have the latitude to ignore them, for example?
You have raised very interesting points, Arnold. First of all, in my years in the court, in all the cases I've handled, I have not encountered a similar situation. But I don't think it is for any domestic court to order the ICC to release a prisoner already within the jurisdiction of the court. In other words, accused over whose person the court has acquired jurisdiction. So sure, there are proceedings in Philippine courts. And I imagine the Philippine courts will entertain the proceedings. I imagine they will hold hearings. I think they are now in the process of planning that. But at the same time, in the end, the ICC has acquired jurisdiction over the accused, former President Duterte. And if I go by the record of the court, it will proceed to hear the case all the way to trial and up to the moment of decision of whether to acquit or to convict him. So the two proceedings, those before the ICC at The Hague and those in Manila can move forward, fine. But I think in the end, in terms of the proceedings in Manila, I don't think a Philippine court is able to order the ICC to release a prisoner.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea plans to strengthen its scrutiny of metals imports as it expects unfair trade practices to become more common amid higher Trump tariffs. Plus, Canadian convenience store giant Alimentation Couche-Tard says it would keep pursuing its friendly pursuit of 7&I, despite a lack of progress towards a deal. Hello again. It is time now for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, South Korea, they're looking to shield its metal industry from steep Trump tariffs. What's that all about?
That's right, I'll tell you now. Concerns of oversupply have been worrying metal producers and governments, pushing them to scrutinize product flows. South Korea says it will strengthen scrutiny of metals imports to protect its producers from potential dumping in the local market. That's after Seoul was hit by U.S. President Donald Trump's worldwide tariffs on steel and aluminium, despite its efforts to avert them. While major U.S. trading partners announced countermeasures, South Korea refrained from taking any immediate retaliatory steps. Last year, Seoul shipped some $3.2 billion worth of steel to the U.S., ranking 6th overall. Its $600 million of aluminium exports placed the country 4th among the U.S. suppliers. Now, its trade, industry and energy minister warns unfair trade practices are expected to become more frequent following higher tariffs, adding that the government will respond firmly to such practices. The risk for steelmakers around the world is that the tariffs worsen the oversupply situation, piling pressure on producers and governments at a time when demand for the alloy is already shaky. U.S. President Trump has threatened further tariffs on the European Union as major U.S. trading partners retaliate for steel and aluminium levies that came into effect yesterday. Now, the EU has offered its strongest reaction so far, launching countermeasures on U.S. imports worth up to $28 billion. Washington has vowed to hit back.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. Nobody can complain about that.
The White House is pushing back against China's dominance in shipbuilding industry, proposing steep levies on Chinese-made ships arriving at U.S. ports. But an analyst we spoke to pointed out to the obstacles in doing so.
China is now the most dominant player in the world's container ship industry. Of the world top, the busiest container ports, 11 busiest, 7 are located in China, including Hong Kong. And Hong Kong's is Shanghai is number 1, Singapore is number 2, and then all the rest are in China until number 5, and number 6 is Busan, and then number 9 is Los Angeles, and number 10 is in the UAE, and number 11 is Hong Kong. So out of the top 11 container ports, China dominates the whole list. And of course, as far as the Chinese vessels are concerned, China's vessels account for 75% of the world's entire container fleet, and accounting for 81% of the market share, and nearly half of the oil container ships carrying oil. China accounts for 48%. So it's not easy just to replace China's trade. And then it's not just the cargo, because the idea is to bring back shipbuilding to America. But shipbuilding costs in the United States are nearly 3 or 4 times as expensive as in China. And then, of course, apart from the cost, there is the whole supply chain, including materials and metals, various and shipping engineers and technicians. The fact remains, not just shipbuilding, but the entire manufacturing ecosystem in the United States has been hollowed out over decades by outsourcing the various kind of manufacturing to other countries, of course, including China. It's not easy just to wave a magic wand and bring back everything, no matter how high the tariffs are.
Now, Taiwan spent a record $16.4 billion last year defending its currency amid stock market outflows and escalating trade tensions. Analysts, however, say more needs to be done. Despite efforts by the central bank, the Taiwan dollar lost more than 6% in value against the greenback last year and has lost a further 0.5% this year, extending a 3-year losing streak. Foreign investors have been reducing their holdings of Taiwanese equities, shedding a net $12 billion over the past 12 sessions compared to $19.5 billion for the whole of last year. Shares of chip-making giant TSMC also falling out of favor, with foreign investors falling more than 11% so far this year. Remember, TSMC accounts for more than a third of the Taiwanese benchmark, and the slide is weighing down on the index. Speaking to lawmakers today, Taiwan's central bank governor sought to allay concerns over TSMC's $100 billion investment impact on the territory's foreign reserves. Now, he says that the firm earns enough to fund its investments. Canadian retail giant Alimentation Couche-Tard says it will continue its, quote, friendly pursuit of Seven & I Holdings, despite expressing frustration over what it describes as stonewalling by the 7-Eleven owner.
For over 6 months now, 7 today, we have been attempting to engage in fulsome and friendly discussions with Seven & I with respect to our proposal. We are, however, disappointed that this engagement has been limited to regularity only, and we have not been able to make progress on broader deal discussions.
Seven & I had cited antitrust concerns and regulatory hurdles when it rejected Couche-Tard's initial $39 billion offer, which now has been raised to $47 billion. Now, last week, the Japanese retail giant said it plans to spin off its convenience stores in North America and to list it as a separate entity, and announced its first non-Japanese CEO as part of a major restructuring of the firm. Beer maker Budweiser has quashed media reports it was planning to cut thousands of jobs this year as it struggles with weak consumer demand in China. An AB InBev spokesperson says that the company plans to continue its long-term investment in China. The assurance comes after a Bloomberg report on the reductions, suggesting most of the planned job cuts would affect Chinese employees. Now, that's as the country accounts for more than 80% of the group's manpower. Now, AB InBev reported forecast beating fourth-quarter profits back in February, though a 90% drop in volumes in China did drag down its performance. The company's portfolio of pricier beers has suffered amid a slow economy and strong local competition. Singapore prosecutors say their investigations revealed that about $390 million was involved in the offences of 3 men accused in the city of fraud over the movement of NVIDIA chips. The trio has been in remand since being charged last month and appeared in court today via video link. Singaporeans Aaron Woon and Alan Wei were offered bail of 600,000 and 800,000 Singapore dollars respectively. The third man, the Chinese national Li Ming, was offered bail of 1 million Singapore dollars. Mr. Lee's lawyers did not object to the bail amount, as well as conditions that include not visiting checkpoints and having an electronic tag. The lawyers of the 2 Singaporeans sought lower amounts. The 3 cases will return to court in May. The trio were among 9 people arrested for false representation during raids by the Singapore Police Force and Singapore Customs. And this comes after reports of intermediaries being involved in the illegal movement of NVIDIA chips to China, bypassing US export controls. And that'll do it for business. Shelley, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Roland, for the business update. Well, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, we look at China's middle class, a major driver of consumption in the country. What happens when they start tightening the purse strings? Find out when we speak with an expert next. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea charges 2 Air Force pilots with criminal negligence following their accidental bombing of a village last week, injuring nearly 30. China has reiterated its stand on realizing reunification with Taiwan after the island's leader, William Lai, accused Beijing of deepening its influence and infiltration against the self-ruled island. And former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte says he is ready to accept responsibility as the International Criminal Court takes him into custody. He's set to face charges of crimes against humanity over his war on drugs. China's middle class, at more than 400 million strong, is larger than the population of the U.S. They are the main domestic driving force behind the country's consumption and economic growth. But due to economic concerns, many have tightened their purse strings in recent years. CNA's weekly current affairs program, Insight, examines the shift in Chinese middle class spending patterns.
In Guangzhou, China, the Li family had just returned from a vacation. Early February marked China's Spring Festival, a time when the Chinese travel back to their hometowns to visit family or sightsee.
我今年春節去旅行嘅話，去咗江西嘅定南古鎮，咁去咗3日嘅。 同我先生同埋囡囡一齊去啦，咁我哋廣州由呢度出發去江西嘅話，其實都係2個零鐘嘅咋，大概去用咗3-4千蚊啦。
The holiday travel rush lasted for 40 days this year, racking up a record 9 billion trips taken across the country. It's known as the largest annual human migration. Besides the festivities and pageantry, there is one reason China watchers pay close attention to the Spring Festival.
As economists, we always look to barometers or early signals, right, of where a particular phenomenon is headed. So where would Chinese consumer spending or consumption spending be like for 2025 for this year? There are a few indicators, right, early indicators. One would be spending over the or just before the Chinese New Year period and during the Chinese New Year period. We look to those as indicators of consumption spending, obviously, but also of consumer confidence.
This year, through the first 8 days of the Spring Festival, domestic travel spending hit an all-time high of 677 billion yuan, or $93 billion. But a deeper look tells a different story. Per-person spending only climbed 1% from 2024 and remains below pre-pandemic levels.
今次嘅春節旅行花費，其實我哋係放咗喺即係感受一下過年氣氛咯。聽講我哋嗰陣時候聽講話，定南古鎮嘅話咧，喺春節會有好多表演節目啦，咁所以我哋係去一個感受一個中國嘅傳統嘅非遺嘅一個氣氛。 我哋係去感受氣氛嘅。
Li's daughter was born during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, they've become more cost-conscious with their holiday budget.
以前嘅話咧就會即係周圍去啦，咁當然而家就會係以前啊出國遊，而家咧就周邊遊。其實而家冇咁瀟灑嘅原因咧，我覺得。 都係因為有咗小朋友啦，咁同埋係疫情之後嘅一個經濟比較下滑咗少少嘅原因。咁小朋友嘅花費會比較大啲啦，咁我哋已經嘅重心咧就會由即係自己嘅一個享樂啦，換咗係俾小朋友嘅教育。
With an annual household income of more than 300,000 yuan, the Li family fall into China's middle income group. The National Bureau of Statistics defines the group as 3-person households earning between 100,000 to 500,000 yuan a year.
I think there's no one definition for middle class. And I think a middle class should be someone who are decently educated, right? Get some tertiary education. And they're also related to people's social status. So that's why the professionals and the managers tend to be the middle class. And also, I think a middle class should be someone who have access to a stable home, retirement saving, health care maybe, and even the affordability, okay, to enjoy some vacation, entertainment.
A third of the country's population, some 400 to 500 million, belong in this category, making China the country with the world's largest middle class.
So their choice is shape entire industries. So are they buying domestic brands or imported goods? Are they investing in education, healthcare, or entertainment? So these decisions affect business opportunities and job creation in specific sectors. They're not just consumers. They are trend setters and also a key indicator of future growth potential. So that's why governments around the world, not just China, pay close attention to the habits of the middle class.
But China's middle class is changing. While the size of the Chinese middle class is increasing steadily, how much they spend is growing at a slower pace.
對於節衣縮食嘅話，其實我覺得喺衣食住行嚟講，我哋都樣嘢方方面面都會做到嘅。例如，即係如果係去食啦、買菜嘅話啦，以前就會去對面嘅supermarket 度買菜啦。咁而家嘅話，我會選擇去街市買菜比較多啲嘅。着衫啊方面嘅話咧，就會買少咗好多啦。護膚品啊、化妝品啊，同埋一啲衫褲鞋襪啊，咁我同我老公都買少好多。
For more insights, we are joined now by Kent Deng, Professor of Economic History at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Well, a warm welcome to East Asia Tonight, Professor Deng. Firstly, perhaps you could help our viewers understand just how crucial is China's middle class to President Xi Jinping's great rejuvenation vision?
Indeed. Ever since year 2000 and 2001, China's model has been demand-driven model. That means China's effort has been geared towards export. So even last year, China exported 20% of its GDP. However, with the COVID shock, the whole world reorganized itself in the way of, say, decoupling from suppliers, simply because the supply chain has been unreliable during the COVID shock. So that means that 20% of GDP of China has been threatened by oversupply. So this turned attention to the middle class of China, which made up about a third of the total population. So this is the situation for everybody, ordinary Chinese as well as decision makers, how to turn the supply-driven model around and make it demand-driven model. This is easy to say than done. So this is a situation facing by China.
So middle class, as you've mentioned, 1/3 of the population, and therefore it is important because it's seen as a key gauge of China's economic health today and where it's going tomorrow, for instance. So right now, though, Professor, Beijing's middle class, right, they're showing signs of struggling. I mean, when you have families giving up their piano lessons, it means there's a serious problem now. So do you think this group, the middle class, are they slipping back into poverty, or is that too harsh a way to put it?
Yeah, there's a danger for the middle class to become impoverished simply because everything they lived for depend on their employment and their salaries. So at the moment, after the COVID shock, it seems to us job offering is less than before. A recent social survey suggests between the age group of 16 to 24, that means high school to university, the unemployment rate was higher than 45%. So this really is a sort of a signal, negative signal towards society saying the next generation of the middle class may be smaller than the current one. Yeah, so this is number one, kind of a negative impact of the COVID. The second thing is we understand the middle class is at the moment heavily in debt in terms of, for example, mortgages. In the developed countries, G7 countries, the mortgage to your salary rate, the ratio is about 1:5 or 1 to, certainly not higher than 1:10. But in the first tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, currently the ratio, your mortgage, the amount of mortgage you need to pay, and your salary is 25:1. For the second tier cities is 11:1. And the third tier and fourth tier cities, that's 8:1. So when you look at this kind of a distortion of high housing prices, so we can pretty much to say the middle class in China has been overly indebted because of the high housing prices. That's number one. Number two is the relative poor provision of pensions, public health care, child care, and so on and so forth. So in G7 countries, for example, you have national insurance, which covers everybody's retirement pension, part of pensions. And secondly, most countries provide free Medicare. You can have private Medicare, but certainly Medicare is free for everyone. But in China, this hasn't been the case. I think the public welfare provision has been falling behind the progress of China's development.
Professor Deng, I just want to pick up on that point, because if let's say China's middle class keeps shrinking, I mean, being indebted and all those other reasons that you gave, keeps shrinking or stagnating, then could that then derail? I mean, China's got, it's trying to hit a 5% growth target. It's got all these big global ambitions. They want to lead in tech or trade. And it's often the middle class that fuels innovation and demand. So do you think that we're going to see an impact there?
Correct. We worry because the middle class really is the pillar of China's growth and development, because they're educated, they have the global vision, and they are creative. Most of them would have a link toward with outside world. They are certainly open-minded, and this middle class provide the foundation of China's entrepreneurship. So in that regard, they are well educated. They should be protected at any cost. Plus, they are the main force of China's domestic demand. If you want to change the supply side model to demand-driven model, then the middle class is where your money should be in. So in my opinion, the middle class should get some, special treatment from the government. For example, this is my opinion. China's land, for property development belongs to the state. China's banks are mainly state-run. So if China can, in some ways, cut the middle class domestic debts by a third, that will certainly push the middle class demand, the amount of demand by a third. So this probably will save China from the kind of plight of being global superpower of manufacturing, but you can't sell everything at the moment. Your 20% of GDP at the moment is subject to export. If you can rejuvenate you rejuvenate your domestic demand by pumping money to the middle class to cover this 20% GDP, you pretty much can turn your misfortune around.
Right.
Yeah. So I think the government has a lot to do.
That's right. And I guess in a nutshell, you've summed it up pretty well by saying that the middle class in China should be protected at all costs. Thank you so very much for that conversation and your insights, Professor Kent Deng from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And you can catch the full Insight episode, Asia's Changing Middle Class, China, later tonight on the 13th of March at 9 p.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And you can also catch up on CNA Video On Demand or CNA Insider's YouTube page. Another break's up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, the new president of the Asian Development Bank warns of the repercussions of President Donald Trump's tariffs on Asian economies. Plus, NASA calls off a rocket launch in the final minutes. Tell you why when we return. Asian economies are bracing for impact amid an intensifying trade war triggered by the Trump administration, as well as heightened geopolitical tensions over Ukraine and the Middle East. My colleagues Julie Yu and Arnold Gay spoke to the new president of the Asian Development Bank, Masato Kanda, and they discussed how the region will have to navigate these challenges.
The Asia and Pacific region is in a much stronger position if you compare to in the past because of the good macroeconomic policies and regional integration. But it can't make us complacent. I believe the continuous reform is needed to increase resilience against these external shocks, and ADB is ready to support these countries' efforts.
Understood, Mr. Kanda. But in the near term, though, in terms of Asia's economic growth, do you see the trade war as the biggest risk?
I don't know, because, at the moment, there is a full of uncertainties. Nobody knows which country or when and what magnitude. This is really complex situation. So what we can do is to protect our economies from these external shocks by strengthening our resilience and boosting the regional integrations. But I don't know this is the most important risk, but because there are other risks. For instance, potentially the geopolitical tension might disrupt supply chain, fueling inflation, or higher and longer interest rates could result in the lower investment because of the worsening the risk appetite and the higher borrowing costs and more fluctuation in exchange rates. So there are many. So what we've got to do is to protect our economies from these shocks, and the best protection is to make our economic policy sound and construct the more integration in the region.
Mr. Kanda, the, if you like, donor climate is changing because, well, first of all, the two biggest donors and members of the ADB are Japan and the United States, and we know that the Trump administration has withdrawn support for, global programs like USAID, is withdrawn from the Paris, climate agreement, might do so, or is, I guess, in the process of doing so for the WHO. I mean, are you worried and are you preparing for the possibility that the ADB may face a similar situation in terms of funding from the United States?
The United States has been a general supporter, financial supporter, and intellectual supporter for ADB's activities. And we have enjoyed a very close and good relationship with the United States. So I'm looking forward to the continuous and even stronger partnership with the United States. But at the same time, our responsibility is to utilize the precious resources entrusted with us from donor countries, including the United States, in the most efficient and effective ways. 2 examples. One, we will boost our lending capacity commitment by 50%, 50% from 24 billion to 36 billion annually in 2034 without any single dollar, additional dollar from donor countries. Another thing is our guarantee mechanism will leverage $1 from donor countries by 4.5%. And I will continue this evolutionary exercises to utilize the money entrusted with us in the most efficient and effective way to deliver the tangible results on the ground.
Stranded in space, astronauts Sunita Williams and Barry Wilmore will have to wait even longer to return to Earth after NASA postponed the launch of the SpaceX Crew 10 mission that will take 4 crew members to the International Space Station. Engineers discovered issues with a vital hydraulic system just 45 minutes before the scheduled launch. Well, the space agency says it's now targeting a launch no earlier than 7 p.m. Friday local time in Florida. Well, the 2 astronauts famously known as Suni and Butch were only supposed to be in space for an 8-day mission in June, but their Boeing Starliner spacecraft faced repeated technical issues, leaving them marooned in space for the last 9 months. They are now expected to return in late March, with a new launch scheduled for 17th of March. NASA says the delay posed no risk to the astronauts, as the ISS is well stocked with food, water, clothing, and oxygen. Well, the extended time in space, however, comes at a cost. Experts have pointed out that they will need weeks of recovery once they make it back to Earth and face difficulties adapting to Earth's gravity. They are expected to experience dizziness, nausea, and what's known as baby's feet, shedding feet calluses normally associated with walking on firm ground. And now we have more coverage on all things space on our website, cna.asia. You can check out the interviews with a host of experts and industry players at last month's Global Space Technology Convention and Exhibition in Singapore. And that does it for East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.